Hello everyone, welcome to yet another cave diver react or a dive instructor react video. This one was sent to me by, one of our listeners on the podcast, on the Dive Talk podcast, and they asked me to react to this video and kind of talk about what's happening. I think this video, and I've actually seen this one before. I try not to watch them before I react so you can get my honest reaction. I've seen this video before. It's been a while though. I haven't seen it in a while, so I'll be reacting kind of live, even though I remember this video before. And I think this video should be watched by every new diver. Honestly, I think every dive instructor like myself should be showing this video because there's a lot of lessons to learn in essentially what happens in the video. So let's get started. It's not a long video, but again, I'll give you some pointers along the way. Okay, so this video is essentially describing a dive in the Bahamas back in 2008. This is why the quality is not great, but still we get to see what's happening. I really love the fact that the person, recording this video is filming the computer, showing us depth, which is great. So you can see, he's talking about that the dive master is essentially setting up the limits. Every time you start a dive, there's a briefing, and obviously the dive master is essentially talking about what they're gonna dive. So I'm gonna pause right here for a second. So if you notice, he's talking about that there's a wall dive, and this wall dive was very steep and buoyancy control is critical. So here's what happens when you have new divers. The best places to go diving are places that kind of bottom out at certain depth, which means that divers cannot go deeper than that. I personally like that when I'm instructing or when I'm being a dive guide or a dive master. I personally like to take people to places where, they're not going to go beyond their limits. And what I mean by that is wall dives like this one where, essentially you go in a wall and the wall can drop to any depth, hundreds and hundreds of feet, for example, are dangerous for people that are not really paying attention to their instruments. Now, obviously, during the class, you learn to pay attention to your instruments. You learn to, keep an eye on it, especially if you're going deep, because you're going through air much faster. Air compresses at depth, which means you're breathing through your air way faster than normal, right? So that's why he's saying the buoyancy control is critical. You need to keep your eye on how deep am I, because there's no frame of reference. When you have the bottom of the ocean, let's say, is a 60 feet or 30 meters or 20 meters, whatever it is, you're going to go down, and the furthest you can go, the deepest you can go is 60 feet. So the chances for you to, go beyond your limits is limited by the bottom. I always, even today, I find this a little bit complex, especially when you're in very open water. Like sometimes we're doing dives, we just came back from a whole week of diving, and we were doing dives, so we're transferring from one wall to another, and between those two walls there's literally just thousands of feet below us. So if we are at 100 feet of depth, for example, and we're transferring from one wall to another, since there's nothing below you, there's no frame of reference, you don't see the bottom, you don't see walls, you don't see anything. All I do is I rely on my instruments. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand about diving. They believe that the deeper you go, the more pressure you feel or anything like that. And that's actually not true. You don't feel any different the deeper you go. I feel the same if I'm at 10 feet or 20 feet or if I'm at 200. It feels exactly the same, and that's because most of your body is made of liquid, and liquid doesn't compress. So no matter how deep you go, I mean, I don't know if that's true if you're at 10,000 feet or something, but obviously you're going to be dead at that depth anyway. But I've been pretty deep, and I don't feel the difference at all. So when you're at 100 feet, I could have been at 150 and not notice the difference at all if it's not because of my instrument. So you have to keep an eye on that. So beginner divers on a deep wall is a bad call, but depending on the wall, there are some beautiful walls out there, especially when it comes to hunting and killing lionfish, which is an invasive species. For example, they love to live in walls, and I love to go out there and kill some. So walls are pretty cool dives, but you just have to stay in the game. Like, you have to get your mind in the game and keep an eye on it. All right, so there's a bunch of divers here. I don't see the guide. He's at 100 feet, so they're already past their limit. They agreed to go to 70 feet. But they're at 100. And he's just in the wall. The wall doesn't look amazing, to be honest. Like, I'm not really sure why they chose this wall. Because I'm not seeing, like, oh my god, like, look at these amazing giant sponges or something that is, you know, super interesting. But whatever. They're in this wall. They're in the Bahamas. So he's at 100, and he sees people that are way deeper, right? So they're supposed to be at 70. He's at 111, as you can see right here. And these two divers are super deep. So you can see they're like 30 feet below, maybe, like 10 meters below him. Just by looking at the camera, that's what I'm thinking. So he's on 113 right now. He's keeping an eye on it. By the way, this guy, he's awesome. He's you know, you'll see why. But he did awesome. Dive Master went up and over the wall, which means that, you know, they were swimming alongside the wall. So imagine the wall is like a cliff like this. They're swimming along the wall. You can go as deep as you want, so you have to keep your eye on it. So at some point, the Dive Master is like, okay, I've had enough. Maybe I'm running low on air. He goes over the wall. So if you go over the wall, typically it's shallow. Obviously, some of these walls start pretty deep anyway, but in this case, I think the wall was shallow, probably at 70 feet or probably 50. So if they were like, okay, so 50, 40 feet, we're going to the wall around 70. Don't go beyond that. But he goes over the wall to shallow waters and kind of leaves everyone behind. Maybe he's thinking, well, they'll follow me if they're, you know, if we're diving all together, follow the guide. And that happens a lot. Obviously, you want to try to keep everyone together and be like, hey, you know, are you guys okay? Follow me, and, you know, make sure that everybody's following you. That's part of being a good guide. But in this case, it looks like, you know, he thought maybe that people were following, and he just went over it, hoping that everyone behind him follows. But in this case, obviously they didn't. So he's at 114 feet, which is about 30-something meters. 129. So he's getting to... at this point, 129, 130 is the limit for deep diving for recreational divers. So if you're a technical diver, you can go beyond that. Obviously, there's extra training and gear and just overall experience and skills, to be honest, to go beyond that. But 130 is the recommended, you know, depth that a recreational diver goes to. I've known people that go beyond that. You know, they go to 140, 150, like there's no big deal. I think that the maximum operating depth of air is 198 or something like that, is about 200 feet. But the problem is that we've talked about this in previous videos. Nitrogen will cause an effect on your body, which is called nitrogen narcosis. So you'll feel like you're drunk. And for most people, this starts around 80 to 100 feet, something like that. As you start hitting triple digits, 100 and plus, for sure, most people start feeling it. And the deeper you go, the stronger you feel it. So imagine if you were drinking alcohol, you know, 100 is feeling like you're drinking some beers. By the time you're getting to 130, 140, 150, now you're like at tequila level, like, right? It gets stronger as you go. And again, we've talked about this in previous videos, but just so you have an idea why there are limits, it's not because the air is toxic or whatever, it's because, you know, at that point you need extra skills and extra training to know how to handle nitrogen narcosis, to know perhaps that you should be taking a different gas named Trimix, which includes helium in your bottle, because it will make it, you know, it will make it safer to breathe at deeper depth than 130. Plus, the biggest risk when you're deep is that because the air compresses the deeper you go, you know, you're going through your air much faster. And if you're not keeping an eye on it, you'll run out of air super fast. So these guys are 131 right now. The divers are still deeper than that. So he pretty much is like, okay, if the guy's not going to do anything, I got to do something. So this guy, if he's, I assume he's a dive professional. Good job keeping an eye on the people that are, you know, less focused and not really paying attention. So he swims down to him. He's like, I got to do something. Let me get their attention. This knucklehead is here taking pictures like it's not a big deal. Looking at, I don't know why, because I don't see anything in this wall that, you know, requires me to risk my life for. And he's already at 141. Again, passed by 3 or 4 meters past the limit that is recommended for someone who has deep diving training, by the way. This is not just every diver. If you're a regular diver, it's 60 feet. That's a recommended depth. 130 if you have special training. These guys are at 100 and something, and I don't know if you caught that 150 so feet. I don't know if you caught that, but one diver had 400 psi. Okay, if you divide that by 15.7, I think you get bars if you live in a country where you're working with bars. And the other diver had 700 psi. Just so you know, we typically go into the water with 3,000 psi. All right, so here in the States, we measure in psi, and you go into the water with 3,000 psi. Most dive operators tells you to come on the boat with no less than 500 psi. All right, 500. I personally don't like to come on the boat with less than 700. So 700 is about a third or so when I think about, okay, the first 1,000, getting to my spot, I'm starting to dive, then another 1,000, I'm at 2,000. If I split that into thirds, I want to keep at least a third of, by the time I get there in order to go in the boat. It's just as an emergency, right? So I always start making my ascent around 1,000, a little bit over 1,000 to get to the boat around 700, up to 500 is fine. This guy's at 150 feet with 400 PSI. Now, and you don't need to do all this math. I was actually looking at some of my previous dives in open circuit. And for me, who I don't have the absolute best surface air consumption, but I'm not too bad either. I've been diving for a while. I breathe on average about 19 to 20 psi per minute. All right, so if you think about the 3,000, I'm about 20 psi per minute, just to round it up. Okay, which means 150 minutes at the surface. So about 3 hours if I'm just at the surface breathing my tank. As you go deeper, obviously that time decreases. So if you take the depth, which is called atmospheres, and you multiply it by the 20 psi, I did a calculation at 150 feet, you're about 5.54 atmospheres. So you multiply that by the 20 at the surface, and you're breathing about 110 or 120 psi per minute at that depth. Now remember that, because one guy had 400. And that is someone who's an instructor, for me, someone who's an instructor, who's not panicked, who's just out there enjoying the dive, just breathing slowly, no problem. I would be breathing at that depth around 120 psi per minute. Now imagine if I'm not experienced, panicked, because I just realized that I have 400 left, and I'm just losing it. Let's just give him the benefit of the doubt that he's super calm and he's breathing somehow 200 psi per minute at that depth. That's 2 minutes of air. Now on the video, he calls it 3 minutes of air. I think they had 2 at best. All right, 2 at best. And if you're a diver, you know that the ascent rate, the recommended ascent rate, should be about 30 feet per minute. So if you do the math at 150, they have 5 minutes, and that is without stopping for a safety stop at 15 feet, which you're always, recommended to stop and do a safety stop. At 150 feet, if you go straight to the surface at the recommended rate, you're looking at 5 minutes. This guy has 2. So this guy's dead. Literally. Like, I'm looking at it, 400 psi at 150 feet, you're dead. And then, if we want to make it more complicated, I think that at 150 feet, maybe you have 3 or 4 minutes of bottom time before you start going into deco. Deco, or decompression, means that you have required stops. Now there's no optional stops. There's no optional safety stops. These are deco stops that you have to stop. And I know this because I know that at 130 is 5 minutes. So I can be at 130 feet for 5 minutes, and then I have to go up if I don't want to go into deco. These knuckleheads are at 150 feet, which means they have 4 or 3 minutes. And they've been there taking pictures like no big deal and running out of air. The guy with 700, again, if he's breathing 200, which I think they're going past that, but let's say it's 200, this guy has 3.5 minutes, and it needs 5 to get to the surface. Now, obviously, you can bolt it and risk it. You can do, instead of 30, you do, I don't know, 60, 90. You can start going fast, but then you risk getting the bends, which means you will have bubbles in your blood, and that can cause embolism, it can cause death. So you can go super fast because you're running out of air, because then you'll die anyway. But you also can go super slow because you don't have enough air. And these guys were in really, really bad shape.
My empire of dirt, I will let you
So this guy took the camera away. Just give me that. Don't be an idiot. Just interlock hands, deflate their BCD, or else they're going to skyrocket to the surface, which, I mean, that is such a pro move, by the way. This guy, he's awesome. If you can get this guy as your instructor, for sure do that. He did awesome. So he deflated the BCD, which is their buoyancy control device, which if you don't do that, you will, it will fill with air as you ascend. Your air will expand, it will fill with air, and it will take you straight to the surface at hundreds of feet per minute or whatever. Like, they'll be in the surface within like 30 seconds and they'll die for sure. So he deflated them. Hang on, I'll take you up. These are all the skills, by the way, you learn as a rescue diver. So at some point, as you progress through your career as a diver and you learn new things and whatnot, the rescue class, to me, is my favorite one to teach and my favorite one to take when I was a student, because it teaches you all of these things. So this guy was perfect, by the book, rescue diver. So 2.5 minutes later, what was that? Sorry, I missed that. Let me go back. Right, so they went up. Here they are, 2.5 minutes later, 0. No air. Like I said, they had 2 minutes. Obviously, as they start going up, the air expands a little bit, and now, you can breathe it for a little bit longer, but 2.5 minutes at 15 feet, 0. No air. I'm surprised. By the way, the fact that they made it in 2.5 minutes to 15 feet from 150, that means that they went 135 feet in 2 minutes, or in 2.5 minutes. That's twice. So let's say about 60 feet per minute. So they went twice as fast as we recommend the maximum to be, the maximum speed. So they went up 60 feet per minute. But what are you going to do? I mean, you can't just die. So they went up, quickly, twice as fast as normal, and made it to 15 feet with 0 air. All right, so 0. There he is. Looking like an idiot. And then this other guy is like, huh? What? I'm 12. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, this was really, really, really rough to watch. Again, everything at 0. This guy is awesome for saving these two kids. And he finishes with, please dive within your limits. This is so true. But if you're a diver, especially if you're a new diver, you have to keep your eye on your instruments. Now, also get the right instruments. These guys had SPGs, or submersible pressure gauges, which means they keep track on an SPG, which are fine. They're reliable, and there's no problem with SPGs, but you have to keep your eye on it. If you're one of the people that are, you know yourself better than anyone, if you know that you're not going to keep your eye on it, you're going to be with a camera and fiddling and not paying too much attention to it, then get a computer. Right? A dive computer that is going to help you. And not all dive computers are the same. Not all dive computers are helpful when it comes to, keeping track of your depth and whatnot. If you don't look at your computer, it's not going to do anything. However, there's one computer that I really, really like. It's called the Peregrine. It's made by Shearwater. If you're thinking about getting a computer, or even if you already have a computer, consider the Peregrine is cheaper than all the other Shearwater computers. I have 4 of them that I use for rebreather diving and cave diving and whatnot. This I only use when I'm teaching open water divers or brand new divers, and also the one I recommend. And what I love about this computer is that, number one, it's awesome. It's built like a tank. But number 2, it vibrates. It's the only computer I have that has a vibration, and it's so strong. Like, people 20, 30, 40 feet away can hear the vibration on it. They look at me, like my dive buddies look at me. It's like, what was that? my computer, right? It starts vibrating if you're going too deep, if your air starts going low, whatever it is, instead of just showing you on the screen like the other computers do, which just shows you like a warning or whatever, this one starts vibrating and super hard. You can tell, even if you're wearing a thick suit or whatever, doesn't matter. You can feel it through it. And that way you can look at it and be like, oh, I'm going too deep, right? I think it starts vibrating at 100 feet. So at 100 feet, and I've wore this again with students and whatnot, if you hit at 100, it starts vibrating. If you hit 1,000 PSI, starts vibrating. So really, really awesome. I don't work for Shearwater. I'm not endorsed by them, or I wish they were sponsors of this channel. They're not. I just love their product, and the Peregrine is the one I recommend to my students because of the the advantages that it gives you by alerting you if you're going out of your limits, right? So as always, I recommend training, studying, obviously practicing as well, and always diving within your limits. This guy, from the video, shout out to him. Amazing rescue. Those two kids would have been dead. No questions. Like, if he waited one more minute, they would have had 1 minute of air, 30 seconds of air at 150 feet. They would have drowned. There's absolutely no chance they would have made it out of there if it wasn't because of, those actions that day. So, awesome. Thank you so much to the person that recommended this video, the listener that recommended this video. If you have any requests, if you found a video out there that is interesting and you want me to, watch it and kind of react to it and give you my thoughts, please go ahead and, send us an email at info@divetalkmedia.com. The email, I'm going to put it below so you can see it, info@divetalkmedia.com, and let us know what is it that you want me to cover or talk about, and I'm happy to discover it with you here in the channel. So thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share with other people. There's always comments in there about like, oh, I love your channel. There's this great content. Please go ahead and share with others because it helps us grow and kind of educate and share our tips and tricks with others that share the same passion that we have, which is all about scuba diving. So we'll see you on the next one.